On the 20th of July, the future King of Norway turned 53 years old, and across the entire country, almost no one raised a glass. Think about how strange that is. A crown prince, the next in line to a 1,000-year throne, reaching a milestone birthday, and a nation that simply could not bring itself to celebrate. No grand appearance, no warm official photograph of a happy royal family, just a quiet, uneasy silence, and a palace that would very much prefer you did not look too closely at what is happening behind its walls. So what happened? What could possibly turn the birthday of a future king into what many Norwegians are now quietly calling the saddest day their monarchy has faced in a generation? I'm Edmund Hale, and over the next half hour, I'm going to answer that question completely. But I have to warn you now, the answer is not one story, it is three, all crashing into this one man at the very same moment. There is an illness inside that palace that the family has barely explained to the public. There is a convicted man who, right now, tonight, is living inside one of the most sacred royal residences in Norway. And there is a future queen, an innocent young woman, whose entire reign is already being poisoned before it has even begun. How did all three of these things happen at once? Why is a man the whole country once welcomed into its royal family now serving out a sentence behind the gates of a royal estate? What exactly is wrong with the woman meant to become Norway's next queen, and why will the palace not say it plainly? And what does any of this mean for the survival of a monarchy that suddenly looks more fragile than it has in living memory? Hold every one of those questions in your mind, because I am going to answer each and every one of them before we are finished. And some of those answers are far darker than you expect. If you want the truth these palaces work so hard to bury, subscribe now, turn on the bell, and let us begin. Because to understand why this birthday broke a nation's heart, you first have to understand how deeply this country once loved this family, and how far they have now fallen. Norway is not like the grand, ancient monarchies you know from the headlines. It is a small, proud, deeply private kingdom, where the royal family has always prided itself on being close to the people, humble, almost ordinary. And this monarchy is younger than most people think. It was only refounded at the very start of the 20th century when Norway became independent, and the people themselves, in a national vote, chose whether to have a king at all. Do you understand what that means? This is not a crown imposed by conquest. It is a crown granted by the people's trust. And here is the thought I need you to carry through this entire video, because by the end it will matter more than anything else. A crown that lives on trust can die the moment that trust is broken. Now, into that gentle, trusting little monarchy, decades ago, walked a young prince named Haakon. And he did something that scandalized the entire country. He fell in love with a woman the palace was never supposed to accept. Her name was mette-marit. She was not a princess, not an aristocrat, not the spotless bride a future king is expected to choose. She was an ordinary young woman with a very complicated past, a wild youth, a party scene the tabloids feasted on, and, most controversially of all, she was already a single mother, with a young son born from an earlier relationship. A relationship with a man who himself carried a criminal record. Can you imagine the uproar? A future king, the symbol of a nation's dignity, marrying a single mother with a past like that. The country split down the middle, and in the days before the wedding, mette-marit did something almost unheard of for a royal bride. She stood before the cameras, and with tears in her eyes, she publicly apologized for her past, and asked her country to give her a chance. How many royal brides in history have ever had to beg a nation's forgiveness just to be allowed to marry the man she loved? And here is the remarkable thing. Norway said yes. Slowly, the country embraced her. The scandal faded, and for 2 decades, Haakon and mette-marit became exactly what a modern monarchy is supposed to be: warm, human, relatable. A love story that had survived the doubters. When their daughter was born, Ingrid Alexandra, one day destined to be Norway's first queen in centuries, the joy felt genuine and national. This was a family the people felt they owned. So ask yourself the question this whole video is really about. What does it take to shatter a family like that? What does it take to turn a fairy tale a whole nation believed in into something people now struggle even to look at? Because that is exactly what has happened. And it did not happen slowly. It happened in a single brutal stretch of months. And it reached its lowest point on the very week this man was supposed to be celebrating his life. Let us begin with the first of the 3 stories. The one the palace has said the least about: the illness. For years there have been whispers about the health of Crown Princess Mette-marit, the same woman who once wept before a nation to earn its love. And notice straight away how it has been handled. Not with a clear, honest explanation, but with careful words, occasional short statements, and long, unsettling silences in between. Does that pattern sound familiar? It should, because every palace in Europe seems to reach for the very same rulebook the moment the health of someone at the top is in question. Say just enough to stop a panic, never enough to actually inform. Here is what we do know. Years ago, the Crown Princess revealed she had been diagnosed with a serious chronic condition affecting her lungs, a progressive illness that slowly, quietly steals a person's breath and their strength over time. Imagine receiving that news. Imagine knowing the illness inside you will only advance, and that your whole life is lived under the gaze of a nation that expects you to keep smiling anyway. And that is exactly what she tried to do. She kept working, she kept appearing, because that is what these families are trained to do, never to let the public see the cost. But an illness of the lungs is a cruel thing to hide, because breath is the one thing you cannot fake. And over this past year, the signs grew impossible to ignore. There were the pauses. There were the moments she visibly needed to rest. At one national celebration, watched by the whole country, Norwegians saw their future queen struggling, visibly, simply to make it through the event. Have you ever watched someone you admire fight for breath in public and felt that cold drop in your own stomach? That is what an entire nation felt that day. Because when you can see an illness with your own eyes, you know all those careful palace statements have not been telling you the full truth. And then, in the summer of 2026, it reached the point everyone had privately dreaded. The disease had advanced so far that the doctors reached for the single most drastic option modern medicine has to offer: a transplant. Mette-marit underwent major surgery to receive a new lung. Understand what that means. A transplant is not routine. It is the last road on the map, the option doctors reach for only when every other path has run out. Does that sound like the health of a woman who is simply a little unwell? Or does it sound like a family that has spent months staring directly at the worst possible outcome, in private, while smiling for the cameras in public? She survived the surgery. In mid-July she was discharged, and the palace at last offered a rare piece of genuinely good news. But even that came wrapped in a warning. Because a transplant is not a cure, it is the beginning of a long, fragile, uncertain recovery, months of rehabilitation, a body that must now be protected and monitored around the clock, and a future no one, not even her doctors, can promise. For the foreseeable future, the woman meant to be Norway's queen will carry out no official duties at all. She is, in every sense, rebuilding her own body from the inside out. Now sit with that and ask the question that makes this first story so heavy. If your husband or your wife had just been through all of that, if you had spent months not knowing whether they would survive, how would you feel walking into your own birthday? What kind of celebration is even possible in a home where the person you love most is still, quietly, in the next room, fighting to breathe? That alone would explain the silence. But here is the truth that makes Haakon's story almost impossible to bear. Because the illness of his wife is not even the scandal that has truly shaken the nation. For that we have to talk about a young man, the very same little boy that mette-marit brought into the royal family all those years ago. The child Haakon chose to raise as his own, because what he has done has dragged the Norwegian crown into the darkest chapter of its modern history. Think about the strangeness of that childhood. Raised in palaces but not royal. Surrounded by a family whose entire existence is duty and cameras and protocol. And yet, standing always just outside the frame, the one person who did not quite fit. Some would call it a privilege beyond imagining. Others would call it an impossible place to grow up. And here is the painful question Norway is now asking itself. Did something in that upbringing go wrong? Or is this simply the story of a young man who made his own terrible choices? Whatever the answer, those choices have now ended in a courtroom, and in a conviction that has stunned a nation. And the sheer length of it is part of the horror. It began a couple of years ago, when the young man first came to the serious attention of the police. And what started as one incident did not stay one incident. Over many months, the investigation grew and grew and grew. New allegations, further arrests, a case that widened every time the country thought it had heard the worst of it. Imagine being his family, watching that unfold in public, month after month, unable to stop it, unable to look away, while still being expected to appear and smile for a serene and stable monarchy. And in the summer of 2026, it reached its conclusion. A court in Oslo found him guilty and sentenced him to 4 years. 4 years. Let that number land. This is not a rumor, not a tabloid whisper, not one of those invented royal dramas that flood the internet with fake breaking news banners. This is a real verdict from a real court against a young man raised inside the family of the future King of Norway. And I will choose my words carefully, out of respect and caution, but the charges he was convicted of were among the most serious a court can weigh. Can you imagine the weight of that on a father, even a stepfather? Can you imagine being a future king, whose entire public life is built on dignity and example, and having to watch a child you raised be convicted and sentenced in front of the whole world? Where does a man even put that kind of pain? And how on earth, do you then walk out in public days later and pretend to celebrate a birthday? But the story does not end at the sentence, because what happened next has truly set Norway on fire, and it answers one of the very first questions I asked you. I asked why a convicted man is right now living inside a royal residence. Here is why. Rather than remaining behind ordinary prison walls for this stage of his sentence, while his appeal moves through the courts, it was agreed he could serve part of it under strict electronic monitoring at home, wearing a tag, watched around the clock. And the home he returned to was not some anonymous flat, it was Skaugum, the official residence of the heirs to the Norwegian throne, the private, protected heart of the royal family. Read that back slowly. A man convicted and sentenced to 4 years is at this very moment serving part of that sentence inside the very estate where the future King of Norway lives. And now you understand the anger. Because ask the question every ordinary Norwegian is asking. Would this have happened to anyone else? Would any other convicted man in the country be quietly allowed to serve his sentence inside a royal estate, behind private gates, far from the ordinary walls the rest of us would face? Or is this exactly the kind of quiet privilege people have always suspected the powerful arrange for their own? There are genuine legal explanations, but the image alone is devastating for a monarchy built entirely on being humble, ordinary, one of the people. A crime, moving into the palace. And it happened in the very same days that Mette-Marit came home from her transplant, the wife returning to heal, and her son returning to serve a sentence, under the same royal roof, in the same unbearable week. So now you can see the full picture Haakon was facing as he turned 53. On one side, a wife fighting to recover from surgery that could have taken her life. On the other, a young man he raised, now a convicted prisoner inside his own home, and a nation's fury pointed directly at his family. Is it any wonder there was no celebration? What would you have done in his place? And remember, we still have not reached the third story, because there is one more person caught in the center of this storm, and hers may be the saddest fate of all. Her name is Ingrid Alexandra. She is Haakon and Mette-Marit's daughter, and one day she is destined to become the Queen of Norway, the first female sovereign the country will have had in centuries. She is entirely innocent in all of this. She did nothing except be born into this family. Think about what this year has done to her. A young woman, barely into adult life, only just stepping into her royal role. She has served in the military, as Norwegian royals do, trying to earn her place, trying to show her country she is ready. She is meant to be the bright, hopeful future of this monarchy. And instead, look at the world she is stepping into. Her mother gravely ill and facing a long, uncertain recovery. Her half-brother, the boy she grew up beside, a convicted man serving a sentence in the family home. And the very institution she is destined to lead, battered by scandal from every direction at once. Before she has worn a single crown, its foundations are being shaken beneath her. Is that fair? Of course not. But when has fairness ever protected the children born into these families? They inherit the glory, yes, but they also inherit every wound, every secret, every scandal that came before them, whether they chose it or not. And there is a particular cruelty in her story that most people outside Norway do not know. Ingrid Alexandra is only destined to be queen at all because shortly before she was born, the country deliberately changed its own laws of succession so that the firstborn child would inherit the throne regardless of whether they were a son or a daughter. She was meant to be the living symbol of a fairer, more modern crown, the first daughter placed ahead of any son. She was supposed to be the hopeful ending of the whole story. And instead, through no fault of her own, she is inheriting its darkest chapter. And behind all of it stands one more quiet fact. Haakon's own father, King Harald, is now extremely elderly, one of the oldest monarchs in the world, and in recent years he has faced serious health troubles of his own. He has been hospitalized. He has needed medical help to keep his heart steady. He has handed more and more of his duties to the very son we are talking about. So think about what that means. The Norwegian monarchy is, right now, leaning on a future king who is himself surrounded by illness and scandal, while the current king grows frail above him, and the future queen watches her family fracture beneath him. 3 generations, and not one of them standing on solid ground. And here is what makes it so painful. King Harald is not a distant or unpopular figure. He is one of the most genuinely loved monarchs this country has ever known. Norwegians still remember the day years ago when this aging king rose at a garden party and spoke not about power, but about love. about how Norwegians come from everywhere, believe all kinds of things, and love whomever their hearts choose, and how all of them belong to one another regardless. It made a nation weep, because it reminded them exactly why they had kept this family in the first place. That is the king who now sits, frail and unwell, at the head of a house in crisis. And that makes the danger greater, not smaller, because the higher the love, the further there is to fall. And do not imagine a Norwegian republic is some impossible fantasy. It is not. There has always been a quiet current of Norwegians who question whether a modern, equal, democratic country should have a royal family at all. In happy years, that current stays small, outweighed by affection. But affection is exactly what this family has spent this year burning through. And every scandal, every image of privilege, every silence where there should have been honesty, hands that current a little more fuel. No one is tearing down the Norwegian crown tomorrow. But for the first time in a long while, people are asking the question out loud. And once a question like that is asked out loud, a monarchy is never quite as safe again. So let me bring us back, finally, to that birthday. Why did an entire nation refuse to celebrate the 53rd birthday of its future king? Now you know. Not because of one tragedy, but because of the impossible weight of all of them at once. A sick wife, a convicted son inside the family home, an innocent daughter caught in the storm, an aging king above him, and a shaken monarchy beneath him. That birthday was never going to be a celebration. It was a man standing, quietly and alone, in the eye of the worst year of his life, and simply trying to remain upright while the whole world watched. And here is what stays with me after a lifetime of watching these families. We are taught to envy them, the palaces, the titles, the wealth, the fairy tale. We imagine all that gold must somehow keep the pain away. But strip it all back, and what is left in Norway this month is painfully, ordinarily human. A husband terrified for his wife, a father heartbroken by a child he raised and could not save, a parent trying to shield a daughter from a storm he cannot stop. Haakon has all the privilege in the world, and none of it, not 1 ounce, could spare him a single moment of this grief. The crown could not heal his wife. It could not save his son. It could not buy him one happy birthday. And perhaps that is the truest, hardest thing this whole sad story has to teach us. That there is no title on this earth that can make anyone safe from loss. So the next time you find yourself envying one of these gilded families, remember a man in Norway, turning 53, standing alone with all of that, on the one day that was supposed to be his. And ask yourself whether you would trade a single, quiet, ordinary, peaceful birthday of your own for everything he has. I think deep down you already know the answer. If this story moved you, then stay with me, because the future of this quiet Nordic monarchy is now one of the most uncertain in all of Europe, and I will follow every turn of it with you. Tell me in the comments what you believe. Was it right to let a convicted man serve his sentence inside a royal home, or is that a privilege no ordinary family would ever be given? And when you are ready, I will take you inside the illness quietly threatening another European throne, a story the palace there is guarding just as fiercely. It is waiting for you right here. I'm Edmund Hale. The crown weighs heavy, but the truth weighs more. I will see you there.